our amendments. So we have reason on our side. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I now call upon Mr. Martin Liu to speak on the amended proposals. There are altogether 23 joint amendments covering Rule 1D, 1B, 3, in relation to 7(1) in relation to quorum, presentation of the petition, the threshold, that is 20(6), and Rule 75(10). The President and the Chairman of the committee has the power to make decisions, that is in relation to the new 19 and 30. Abuse of procedure, 40(4), 40(4), and (6), as well as duty of committee, 17(9)(c). I'll only focus on the number of major amendments and reply to them. In our amendments, there is one that was seemed to be the harshest by others. That is under 20(6), threshold for presentation of petition. Our amendment is to bring the ROP abreast with the times. It's not a matter of raising the threshold. I don't know whether Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting and Ms. Helena Wong could not understand the petition system or not. This has nothing to do with filibustering, they said. Though ROP should keep abreast with the times. The report given by the CROP clearly states that the purpose of this amendment, what it is, and they should have read it. Members pointed out that the Select Committee is a platform to conduct investigation and monitor the administration. I want to say that the Select Committee is not a platform, nor is it an investigation mechanism to look into government officials or the administration, or a tool to hurt your enemy. Well, this is an organ to conduct investigation into major and important matters, not to fight against the administration or to monitor the administration. And as to whether how much the opposition understands about the referral, well, the Select Committee has two functions. One relates to powers under the PNP, the other has nothing to do with that.
The former is preserved, and it is just that the threshold is raised for the latter. As for select committees which are not given the powers of PNP, raising the threshold for this type of select committees does not change the fact that it doesn't have powers and privileges. I was once a chairman of this type of select committees, and the persons summoned can choose to come or not, and we would seek papers, but then people have refused because of commercial secrets in the papers. So there is no summoning power for these select committees, and usually they spend $6 million of public money. If every time we want to use $6 million public money to select committees without any teeth and to do political work, as the opposition camp says, this will help them monitor the administration. But I think we need to have more consent before these should be formed. Altogether, there are many amendments towards the petitions. They are from 4 political parties or organizations, and all of them have to do with the quorum for petitions. The DP and the CP have spoken on the threshold for presentation of petitions. 3 members and 4 members from the different parties did so, but they are moving different amendments. So, in fact, have they thought through these amendments, and are they really justified? Or are these lightly moved just for the sake of delaying the debate? Because if you look beyond the surface, I think they are just seeking to waste the precious time of this council, and that is also a filibuster. And also the committee stage quorum will be lowered from 35 to 20, including the chairman, but the opposition camp is stating otherwise. They don't understand that the council is different from the committee stage. Mr. Eddie Chu says that after the quorum is lowered to 20, then amendments passed will not amount to amendments passed by the council. Mr. President, the council and the committee stage are not and have never duplicated each other. There is no contradiction or any duplication between the two. Of course, the council will still preserve its quorum, and the committee stage will also act according to its quorum. So what Mr. Eddie Chu says is logically faulted. Mr. Eddie Chu also said that the committee stage is part of the legislative process and it should not be treated otherwise. I think he means that we should treat it as the council. But the Bills Committee of the council is also part of the legislative process. Its duty is that after the second reading, the committee stage should scrutinize the bill. It is also part of the legislative process. Then why should it not be less than half of the council membership according to the basic law? Again, this is logically flawed. And also with regard to 17(3), the opposition camp is saying that when the committee stage is now council, and they say that there should be another debate, but that would only complicate the procedure of the council. This is not a proper procedure to deal with quorum. And they don't know which procedures are important. This is unacceptable. And we are going to amend 19(1)(a) and 30 so that the President, when there are numerous proposed amendments which have with similar purposes, the President will be able to select one which is more effective. The opposition camp proposes amendments saying that the President should seek the consent of the movers of motions or resolutions, or that all members should support or consent to this so that the President can merge or separate amendments which are similar. I cannot but ask, in the last few years when we had the appropriation bill, the opposition camp proposed thousands of amendments. If each mover has to give consent before the President can rule on them, I think the appropriation bill will use up the entire session for this council before we can hope to pass the appropriation bill. And the administration, the public organizations, even hospitals, the social welfare department, the police, should they grind to a halt just to wait for members to support the bill? If the opposition camp has to implement Article 73(2) of the Basic Law to pass the budget, do they really want to do this, or do they want all the government departments and public organizations to grind to a halt? And we say the President should have selective powers, and the opposition camp goes in the other direction. And also we have 1B, that there will be the clarification of powers and functions of the President, but we find the opposition camp's amendments unacceptable. So the President should have selective powers. We are also proposing to amend 40(4), 49(4), and (6) in order to clarify the powers of the President and committee chairman to tackle abuse of procedures. But the opposition camp is quite superfluous in their amendments. They are also seeking to delay procedures. different members can move adjournment, they say, and don't you think this is also a delay of the procedures? And also, if these adjournment motions should be debated by the entire council, and it is said that they can be voted upon only after the division bell has rung for 5 minutes, don't you think this is again a deliberate delay of the procedures? And if my amendment is vetoed, you are turning a blind eye to the abuse of procedures in the council. In fact, many overseas parliaments just do not allow any debate on these adjournment motions. Should we stick to our old ways? Therefore, we can't accept the amendments proposed by the opposition. Also, with regard to other amendments on the powers and functions of the president, saying that he should preserve the autonomy and the freedoms stated in the basic law, etc. Now, my amendments seek to state clearly the powers and functions and also the constitutional source for such for the president. If in the ROP we list this and that into the ROP, does it mean that those that are not included in the ROP, the president does not have to abide by those? Therefore, the amendments are unnecessary and inappropriate. In fact, how the president conducts the meeting in a fair and orderly manner, and the opposition camp will just not agree with the rulings made. The relevant amendments to the ROP are such that in this debate, the opposition camp has time and again opposed or challenged the rulings of the president. Of course, they can comment on the way the president conducts the meeting. It's just like this meeting. Some opposition camps have invoked ROP 49 bracket 1 bracket B to reprimand the president, but people can see whether this is fair. President, with regard to committee chairman, we are also proposing amendments, including the new 79 bracket C, but the opposition camp is making necessary amendments to the deciding on the agenda of the committee. They are saying that there must be no opposition, or there must be notice given 5 clear days before the meeting, or at least there is consent by half of the members before we can decide on the agenda. These amendments are just not implementable. If they are carried, the meeting just can't even decide on an agenda, and in the end, all committees cannot hold meetings. President, I believe together with other pro-establishment camp members will know that after I have moved notice to amend the ROP, the opposition camp wrote to me to say that we should hold meetings to discuss the ROP amendments. And then we set up, by both camps, the 8-person group, and either side stated their views on the amendments. With regard to the amendments from the opposition camp, well, apart from those that are against the basic law and other laws, the pro-establishment camp has never criticized the opposition camp amendments in the open, but here we must state our views. The pro-establishment camp has always adopted an open attitude in order to try to discuss the amendments with the opposition camp so that we can build mutual trust gradually, and also to try to find the biggest agreement possible. But then it is regrettable that this went against our will, and the opposition camp never supported or consented to amendments that we've thought to be fair. So I speak. I now call upon the 11 members who will move the second to 12 proposed resolutions to speak again. Finally, I will call upon Honorable Paul Chair, who has moved the first proposed resolution, to reply. The Honorable Alvin YEUNG, do you wish to speak again? Yes, I do, President. Thank you, President. President, I believe when I speak now, it will be the last speech before the ROP are amended. Well, yes, this is already formal, but let me now respond to the members who have just spoken. First, I will start with Mr. Gary Chan. Mr. Chan compared himself to Guanzhong, that they are benevolent people, but maybe he didn't know that Confucius criticized Guanzhong. Confucius said, if the two armies don't practice courtesy, then there will be no courtesy for either side. What is Confucius saying? Confucius is saying that Guanzhong would only set his eyes on benefits, no matter what his bosses would say, for example, how the house should be furnished, how the meals should be set for the guests. And even if this goes against the rules of courtesy at the time, Guanzhong would still agree if this is dictated by his boss. So it's quite clear that he is placing benefits for himself in the first place, and that he also contributed to the disintegration of protocol and propriety in the warrior states period. Mr. Gary Chan is saying that he can compare himself to Guanzhong, that he is actually putting things back on the on the right track. I don't know whether he means that comparison, or he is actually satirizing him and his own colleagues. I would say, Mr. President, that the ROP amendments have nothing to do with the re-establishment of protocol and propriety. Rather, it represents a disintegration of that. Please remember that after what Guanzhong did, the dynasty did not last. Mr. Gary Chan also read out the names of members who he said also contributed to aborting of the meetings. But, Mr. President, it is clear that we are the attacker and you are defending any quorum calls. We are attacking. Why would we want to defend the attack? Because we want to attack you. You must be the defender and stay here to stage a defense. You know that this is a war of attack and defense, or else why would they be happy to stay here for 45 minutes? And then on the other hand, they blame you why the pro-democracy camp would not stay here and defend the attack. I think they are telling lies with open eyes. Mr. President, I also understand that in this battle of attack and defense, the pro-establishment camp did not always put up a good defense. I would be gentlemanly. I would not want to read out all the names of the pro-establishment camp members who were absent in those two aborted meetings. Of course, they want to change the system so there could not be any quorum calls from now on. But they are not doing it this time, not because they don't want to. It's just that they can't. Mr. President, Mr. Phyllis Chung, when he spoke, mentioned there was this 8-person group, and that should have been a good platform for discussion, and this is also mentioned by Mr. Martin Liao. It was unfortunate that I was not one of the 8. I was not in that group. But what I want to mention is when the pro-establishment camp knew that they hold all the stakes, including the slashing of time for speaking. This time around, we only have 15 minutes to discuss 49 amendments. They have all the stakes, so they have no incentive to allow them to speak to us. At the same time, Mr. Felix Chung also said that we should stand together and negotiate with the administration. I'd like to tell Mr. Felix Chung, had it not been for the pro-democracy camp to buy time all the time, what kind of sleight of hand would you have to talk to the administration? So you should actually thank us.
Mr. President, I see that time is now 11:45. This might be a convenient time for the pro-establishment camp. Call for quorum, please. We have a quorum. Please continue. Mr. President, well, if everybody is so happy to continue to listen to my speech, then I should continue. Well, I will go on until they think that the answering the nation's call is more important than staying here and listening to my speech. We don't have a quorum now. All right, I'll help them. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Alvin YEUNG. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to respond to Mr. Wong Kwok Kin and the points he raised when he spoke just now. Just now, Wong Kwok Kin said that in other countries, when members filibuster, they read the telephone directory, and that's not the case in Hong Kong. But I'd like to remind Mr. Wong Kwok Kin that if we could read out the telephone directory or the Bible, we would do it. But Mr. President, of course, would stop us, and Mr. Wong Kwok Kin, of course, also knew that. But it seems that the ROP hasn't changed in this regard. We cannot read out the telephone directory. Mr. Wong Kwok Kin at the same time also said the following. If the Democratic camp is so resentful about the ROP's amendment, why is it that the Democrats have proposed 10 amendments, whereas there is only one from the pro-establishment camp? Well, this is smart because Dr. Martin Liao actually moved one motion containing many amendments. And that is why they only have one motion containing many amendments. I think we need to clarify the matter for the benefit of the public. We should understand that, in fact, the one motion from the pro-establishment camp entails over 20 amendments, not just one. And just now, Mr. Abraham Shack made an excellent speech. I may not agree with all the points in his speech, but I think we need more such quality and sincere speeches in this council. It's for the benefit of the whole council.
主席，係石議員。
Of course, the central message of Mr. Abraham Shack is that it's a good thing to amend the rules of procedures. It's for the good of everybody. But of course, that's where we differ. He said that in amending the rules of procedures, they have certain principles to go by. They have certain considerations. But is that true? What is the ultimate objective of this exercise to amend the rules of procedure on the part of the pro-establishment camp? Do they really want to improve upon the rules of procedure? Of course, we've had a lengthy debate. They think this is the way to go, and we have our own ways to criticize that attempt. But perhaps I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss this with Mr. Abraham Shack. Now, this is a major exercise to amend the rules of procedure. And then if you take out the 20-odd amending motions of the Democrat to counter that, well, we are actually mainly talking about the 20-odd amendments moved by the pro-establishment camp. Now, we have resorted to all means to gain grounds in terms of time or procedure, but we were totally defeated. But of course, that's not our fault. Now, I don't want to direct the criticism to you every time, President, but the objective fact is through the ruling of the President, however fair it is, all our attempts have been nullified. So let's talk about the 20-odd amendments moved by Mr. Abraham Shack. Now, for these amendments, the most controversial one must be about the quorum of the Committee of the Whole Council. Now, I'm not going to say too much more about that amendment. I'm not as patient as Mr. Horace Yeung to read out the legal considerations. I just want to say that the Council is the same as the Committee of the Whole Council, because the Committee of the Whole Council does not have its own set of rules of procedure. The Committee of the Whole Council still relies on the rules of procedure for the whole Council. And as Mr. Ray Chan has pointed out, if the Committee of the Council is not the same as the Council, then definitely there will be election of a different chairman. But it's never been done because they are two and the same. And that's the most important point I want to point out. Now, of course, with time, the rules of procedure should evolve with times. I agree. Now, if we are amending the rules of procedure for the better in keeping with the times, yes, of course we should accept it. But is it the case this time? Now, we are said to be the tyranny of the minority. And as Mr. Scheck pointed out, that's manifested in our behavior in the past. But let's be fair. Now, Mr. Scheck also admitted candidly that we have more votes. In the terms of the election system, the Pan-Democrats are the minority, but it's because of this unfair system. That's why we are the minority in this council. So this is a distorted system. Do we then just accept everything or put up with everything that we consider to be wrong? Now, would there be any chance for exchange of views? Well, I think you know very well what's been happening in the past 5 years. For the last term of the government, has it ever tried to engage in dialogues? So it's not just a matter for the Pan-Democrats. The loyalists would know this very well. You know deep down what's going on. And we know it particularly because we are the party involved. We know exactly what's been going on. For the last term of the government, it's been doing a demonstration of being favoring some certain parties. So that's why, as the minority in this council, we have to resort to filibustering. Without that, how can we help the public in voicing their concerns about major issues like infrastructure projects and so on? Now, Mr. Scheck is a gentleman. I'm sure he deserves the title the honorable member. But I don't think that every member of the pro-establishment camp would know that. You may oppose verbally, but do you vote the same way? That's not the way you monitor the government. It's not like you just say something to the government and they say, okay, fine, and then they will change things. No. It doesn't happen. So for the Pan-Democrats, all we can do is with the little powers we have, we force the government to change. And that's the room given to us by the rules of procedure. In future, if the rules of procedure are changed as you have wished, do we still have that room? Maybe, but definitely that room would be very much limited. So is it good, better or worse for Hong Kong? We can't tell probably in the near term, but maybe many years later, after we've all left this council, we will regret it, but it will be too late. Now, I would like to respond to this point too, Mr. Scheck. You said the President has role of master of rules, master of procedures. In other words, he should be the final arbiter on rules. Now, we want the chair will be impartial. Whoever is in this chair, a man or woman, whoever, we hope that he or she would command the respect of all of us here and everyone in the community. But unfortunately, for various reasons, since last year, it made it impossible for us to do so. For the person in this chair, that dignity, the solemnity has been substantially undermined. I'm sure the pro-establishment camp knows that very well too. It's because of what happened last year, and now you propose to change the election method for the president. Now, do you think then this presidency would again be respected? I'm sure for members in the loyalist camp, especially those with wisdom, will know that whoever has caused this problem has to resolve the problem. So by amending the election method, it will not make the president become more respected. That's the fundamental issue. Next Monday, that's the 173rd anniversary of the enactment of the rules of procedure. And very soon, there'll be changes to this red book. We don't know how we can put things right after. We don't know yet. But I hope every one of us would be able to face this red book with conscience. This book has 173 years of history. So I hope we do manage to get back to the right track. Thank you. Ms. Tanya CHAN. Well, yes, we're coming to the final moments. It's now the time for members who've moved amending motions to respond. Now, our party chairman, Mr. Alvin YEUNG, has said this is war, between the offense and the defense. And, of course, the pro-establishment camp has said long ago that they're going to amend the rules of procedure. Of course, we need to review the rules of procedure, every rule of it, to see where we can make improvement. Now, after we've submitted our amendments to the Secretariat, Mr. Alvin YEUNG and Mr. Dennis Kwok have explained that our amendments are meant to enhance transparency and also is to help us perform our duties better. And also there'll be balance in the powers of the presidents. We would also like to increase the resources for the Secretariat, so the government could therefore give more resources to the electrical. Now, whether the president is able to conduct business in this council effectively depends on how he behaves, really. Now, I was also following Mr. Abraham Sheik's speech just now. Mr. Alvin YEUNG mentioned this point too. Mr. Sheik used the term master of procedure. Master reminds me of someone who's in charge, the master of the house. And so we know the president is the most important person to enforce the rules of procedure because he himself has no powers. He himself is just a member of the council too. Let's not talk about whether the member is elected with no votes. That is, he's elected ipso facto anyway. His powers as president are given to him by rules of procedure. Of course, there will be cases when discretion is given to him, but still, he must go by the rules of procedure. Now, for our president here, initially he couldn't quite adapt because every time when we said there was a point of order, initially he would say no point of order. Instead of asking what is your point of order, his immediate response was no point of order. And I thought it was strange, how come there could be no point of order? But anyway, then he eventually learned, probably because he's then gotten into the job, and then the secretary probably has prepared all the versions of different scripts for him. So if this is the point of order, here you can give this reply and so on. So eventually he settled into his job in a way. But sometimes when there's need to give a ruling on whether we digress, so I don't think the president is always right. Now, we don't always challenge the president, but I've been I was a council member when Jasper Zhang was the president. Yes, he came from the pro-establishment camp. He was a directly elected member. But I would say to some extent he's fairer. But of course, I would say there's a blemish in his record as a president with that incident we know, that we all know about. But anyway, he has high expectations of members of both camps. And if some members may make very dull speech, sometimes he would be humorous about it. I think we all enjoyed that. I think it was long hair. He recited the poem, and then the president pointed out immediately he left out two characters. So he corrected him at once. Now, this is the duty of the president, and it's also what the president should have as a person, and not every president has that, of course. So it's about the quality of this council. seen through the quality of the president. Now, now we see our president just trying to get further power, so he's above everyone else. Now, you keep saying that your ruling is not open to debate, but then Mr. Ip Kim Yuen tried to correct you. It's not what the writing is about. Maybe later on you might change the rules of procedure to say that the president's decision is supreme. Now, many members from the pro-establishment spoke just now. They all made quality speeches because they tried to explain why they would support certain amendments or the amendments of Mr. Martin Liao. They reviewed history, and I found those speeches, personally, the more interesting ones, because at least they tried to give reasons why they support such amendments. And then after I spoke yesterday, I see, yes, many members from the Loyalist camp were listening to my speech, including Mr. Hon Charles, because I tried to explain the reasons for my amendments, and I also talked about the process of the establishment of the committee and so on.
But Mr. Paul TSE's criticism of my speech was I was too meticulous. But in fact, he was very respectful of his own amendments. He spent time to read Mr. Ip Kim Yuen's article on the two Chinese characters, Goi. So Mr. TSE did spend time to read through that article. Now, some may say, how come you have taken the trouble to amend this character? Well, Mr. Paul TSE was the one to move that amendment, but Mr. Ip Kim Yuen had contrary views. Of course, his speed, he could not speak as far as I am, but then he, on the editorial section in Mingpao, he wrote an article on why he felt that the amendments to the character Goi were necessary. This is what we expected in this council, so that we can have interaction and exchange of views. I hope Mr. Paul TSE, you will not mind me doing this. You may say that I'm being meticulous, but if I can be meticulous, that I am being nitty-gritty, I think this is a proper attitude. However, because of the powers of the president, this time we don't have the opportunity to explain amendments that are not well understood to colleagues. We are deprived of this right. We are talking about very normal exchange of views. I have read through many documents, including even the hard work of the Secretariat. They failed to give a full account of the amendments. I have got to understand the amendments a little better after a few days of debate. Of course, we can all do our own research, but as we all know, the work of this council is the workload is heavy. Well, even this morning, I think Mr. Abraham Sheck knows, I was submitting reports on various topics to PAC. I've got 2 reports uncompleted yet. Although we have the assistance of our staff, but our research may not be futile, although only maybe as little as 5% is used, but our research has helped us to make clear our views, and we explain to the public why there are amendments. And these amendments are genuine, they are not fake, and I'm sure you have your rationale and justifications behind your amendments. But this discussion is accused of filibustering. Of course, views are different on the act of filibustering. Still, I'd like to tell you that when there is something wrong with the system, even though we ask very serious questions, our serious remarks and queries on issues are regarded by you as being filibustering. This is so unfair. Now, the pro-establishment member may think that I'm in the opposition camp. That doesn't matter. When we used to have 60 members, we could discuss things at panels. Just to quote a recent example, the Education Bureau would like to seek a $12 billion grant to help universities to set up, to build dormitories, students' halls. But as we know, if it is set up in the means of a trust, we know that it's hard to control the use of the fund in future, because in future UGC will be responsible. And of course, at a panel level, we should ask the Education Bureau how it is going to monitor the use of such funds. But we have 70 members here. No matter how well Dr. N. Zhang, chairman of the education panel, controls time, we can only have a few minutes to ask questions. And sometimes government documents are not that detailed. We won't have the opportunity to question further. By the time the funding application reaches FC, we have only 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 minutes respectively in different rounds. So we are not just asking for undertakings from the administration. We wanted to give us a clear account of policies, because at PAC meetings we consider government documents and minutes and records of their meetings. Sometimes we haven't got enough time for the administration to explain the policies to us. Well, we've been chairman too. Sometimes we're forced to give only 5 minutes to each member. So the papers from the administration are getting shorter and shorter, and it's difficult for us to monitor the government properly. Our advanced preparation work can't be done properly. As a result, they can spend money more and more easily without our monitoring. So at the end of the day, it may not just be members who suffer. It can well be the public and our future generations. So questions we ask may sometimes be considered as being as an act of filibustering from you, and sometimes we cannot deal with such issues calmly. And I'd like to take this opportunity to ask Mr. Chan Paul, when we talk about the FC, Mr. Paul said that his blood pressure was soar every time when he chaired an FC meeting. To be fair, when I've been colleagues with Mr. Chan Paul in other panels or in other organizations, he does take his job very seriously. Even though he cannot be present through a meeting, he would write down his views and questions. Since we're called honorable, I hope we can all respect our own position and less take issues seriously. There are reasons to these amendments, but as our party leader said, we don't know when the amendments or the ROP can be amended. But if the opportunity comes, I heard from some loyalists that they have left a clue that there might be further tightening of ROP. They are just waiting for us to lose the battle. Well, let me tell you that if you hate us so much, and if you talked as if the whole community hated us for filibustering, let me tell you that in 2016 we won the elections. We came back with even more votes. So I hope you understand that the public discerning eyes are watching over LegCo. They will understand whether questions we ask are just for the sake of filibustering or for monitoring the government. They have discernment, and elections are a clear proof of their judgment. I hope we can be accountable to the community, and that is what we call balance, and not what the president does. He called that he's trying to balance different interests under pretext of enforcing the ROP. That is not real balance. Your time is up. Mr. WU Chi-wai. Thank you, President. This may well be my last speech I make in these resolutions to amend the ROPs. The pro-establishment camp claims that amending the ROPs would enhance the efficiency of our doing electrical business. But how do you define efficiency? What if it is a waste of public money? Under the Basic Law, it is our duty to monitor the executive. We have to approve funding. Yes, these are our inherent duties in the Basic Law. And by default, we are here to provide checks and balances to the executive. If our efficiency is based on our being a rubber stamp and is by turning a blind eye to government's policies, or if we just appear to monitor the government, then this is not real efficiency. In recent years, FC papers from the administration have met with grilling from members, to the extent that the government is very often lost for words. And even Mr. Chan Kim-po and Mrs. Regina Ip, chairman of the ESC, would say that officials are evading questions. So their replies are recorded in our minutes through our questions. And if they are not willing to answer these questions directly, then now when we ask questions seriously, you call that filibustering. And now you want to amend the rules of procedure to further tighten our room to speak on policies. Now, I think we can see this in the amendments to the ROP. The most important part of our duty is at the committee stage of the whole council. We have opportunity to speak because the committee stage would involve amendments to various bills, and these may be areas where a consensus cannot be reached at the Bills Committee, but a debate here would give us an opportunity to put everything on handset, and that the debate may subsequently, ultimately allow consensus to be reached, and that's the purpose of the committee stage. In the amendments, we can see two major features. First, Mr. Martin Liu's amendments would greatly increase the powers of the president and to limit members' ability to move motions. And second, to undermine the electoral's ability to monitor the executive. We are going through a joint debate on dozens of amendments. We only have 15 minutes each to speak on the amendments. How can there be sufficient time for us to express our views on the amendments and to put forward our views? The presentation of petitions such that so long as 20 members have risen, then the matter will be referred to a select committee. They would want to increase the threshold to 35, and that is not really for the setting up of a select committee, but for referral to the House Committee for further consideration. So this is really a move to undermine our ability to monitor the government. I think the public will know for sure. And as we all know,
that a select committee is a toothless tiger. What we can do at most is to ask government officials to give clearer explanations, because we don't have the power to summons witnesses. We cannot really force the government to give us a detailed account, and we just want to put everything on record to prevent a repetition of such mistakes. Now, if the threshold is to be increased to 35 members, now is it really efficiency? So only some parties in this council will be able to present a petition in the future, and if other members would like to do so, it will be too difficult. The president has great powers, and yet we do not have checks and balances in this council, which is returned by a very undemocratic system. In Western parliaments, their members are usually returned by genuine and universal elections, whereas here we have functional constituencies, and our background is very different.
And apart from that, we also have the split voting system. It is under these circumstances that there is distortion in the way how motions are deliberated in the council. Sometimes the motion may have the support of the majority, and yet because some members are under the control of the government, in the end these motions are not passed. Under such a system, a president coming from the pro-establishment camp would only inflate the power of the pro-establishment camp in the council, and we're therefore all the more concerned about the mandate of members in this council, in particular when our president of the council has 0 vote. Where is his mandate? And that is why amending the ROP will undermine the functions and the role of our council. We will not be able to monitor the executive arm. And we are going to facilitate the collusion between the 3 powers. Our duty is supposed to monitor the government in its policy formulation, etc. But now, because we place emphasis on efficiency, we are helping the government in its policy implementation. Just like on this occasion, the administration has withdrawn all other bills and motions so that we can all focus on this amendment exercise. Does this form the basis for collusion among the 3 powers? Mr. President, I'd like to discuss the amendments to the ROP on another level. Since the reunification, as I mentioned in the last speech, 1 country, 2 systems was designed so that Hong Kong people could accept the authoritarian rule of the Chinese Communist Party over Hong Kong. You may recall before the reunification, there were a lot of social movements. There were those who championed self-determination and autonomy, and there were also those who championed Hong Kong people having the right of abode in the UK. It showed the grave concerns of the public in Hong Kong back then. They were concerned that the authoritarian rule of the CCP would be implemented in Hong Kong. Of course, things have changed. Our country is so powerful, such that all other countries are kowtowing to our country. We would not challenge our country from this angle. But if I'm asked whether I would accept 1 country, 1 system, I think that everybody's answers would be the opposite. That is why we need to understand the circumstances and the sentiment. And in fact, this mindset is also reflected in this council over the years. Just now, many members talked about the resentment by many on filibustering. When it comes to elections, people hold different views because people understand that we need checks and balances in this council. We need to fight against the pro-establishment camp and the administration so that Hong Kong will not be mainlandized, so that we will still have one country, two systems. There is power imbalance in this council. If we only place focus on one country and not two systems, there will be a problem. I'm not suggesting whether this is right or wrong, but we need to address the question. I'd like to go to the Aesop's fables. There is a story about the sun and the north wind, and when the sun and the north wind are comparing with each other, testing who would be able to make the elderly person in the street to take off the jacket. The north wind, of course, said, I can, of course, just blow the wind and make him take off the jacket. Well, he may do so, but then the person might have died from the cold. So is it that the system is no longer suitable for survival and that people will need to leave the place? Is it the best for Hong Kong? In the face of the Belt and Road Initiative and the country's development, should we encourage Hong Kong people to stay and contribute to our country? Do we even need to ask this question? Or rather, we take a more moderate approach, just like the sun providing warmth to the people so that people have confidence in our country because the country is rich and powerful now. Things are different, and that the country would progress towards better development because of the wealth. Wouldn't it be more meaningful? We claim ourselves to have to share the same blood as Chinese. We should preserve the tradition. Or should we rather agree with the mainland officials saying that Hong Kong has already been mainlandized? There is Hong Kong is part of mainland and there is no need to mainlandize Hong Kong. And if that is the case, what is the value of Hong Kong? If Hong Kong is tainted red, under such circumstances, how can we make our economy more competitive? And I have a question for the business sector. In terms of doing business, do we enjoy the edge under one country, two systems, such that even in the face of competition from other cities in the mainland, we can still progress? It is very important that we preserve the traditions and core values under one country, two systems. One important element is whether in this council we can resolve political bickering and conflicts in society through this platform, and whether the administration will be subject to sufficient checks and balances so that matters that people do not have faith in can be resolved in this council. You have the help from the Western District, and you just do the bidding of the liaison office. If you go on like this, how could you be accountable to your voters, be it the loyalists or the pro-establishment camp? I believe that we all want one country, two systems to be effective in Hong Kong so that the value of Hong Kong can be enshrined. Unlike the mainland officials saying that Hong Kong is already red in color, there is no need to think about mainlandization. Hong Kong isn't red. Mr. Deng Xiaoping said that Hong Kong should remain unchanged for 50 years. his intention is to make sure that the country would be rich and powerful, such that there will be developments, so that one day Hong Kong people will be convinced. I hope that we can all bear this in mind. Mr. Charles MOK. Mr. President, the pro-establishment camp is really target-oriented. Only 14 members spoke, together with 2 members who have moved the motion. Altogether, only 16 members from their camp spoke. Now, if this practice is adopted for other major issues in the future, then it will be problematic, because in the past, every member used to speak in turn, so that it will be recorded in Hansard. But I think that on this occasion, some members might want to speak, but for some reason they could not. Is it what's happening now, as we suggest? If we change the rules of procedure today, tomorrow there will be legislation on Article 23. Maybe by then you will also speak up to explain why you support Article 23 legislation. The mission of the pro-establishment camp is to, of course, facilitating the voting on the motions. So it's all right for members to refrain from speaking. Anyway, some members spoke, and I'd like to respond to their points. Mr. Jeffrey Lam and some other members always talked about the smooth conduct of meetings. I'd like to ask what smooth means. Who are we doing this for? Mr. Wong Kok Kin and other members talked about going back on track. What track is the right track? Whose track? Is it your track? That is the right track? I don't have time to debate on each and every point what is meant by smooth, what is meant by the right track, and we've all been putting forward our own arguments. But of course, it's really nice to say this. We should go back on track, the right track, but the devil is in details. So the public should really be careful about this. You always talk about communication. Is it that we refuse communication, we're reluctant to communicate with you? It is impossible to communicate with you, because since the administration and the pro-establishment camp already has sufficient votes, then you only ask us to accept your proposals. This is not communication. Mr. Wong Kok Kin, when he spoke, I noticed, of course, that he started with criticisms on us, but he extended the olive branch. He said that he hopes that in the future that we can have some cooperation. I believe in his sincerity. He's not just putting up a show for his electors. Of course, cooperation is necessary, but over the years, we haven't seen any cooperation at all, especially on some issues. You refuse even to discuss with us, including this ROP amendment exercise. Is it because of the by-election, which is upcoming, that you play much in Jeff? Many people would like to see the pro-establishment camp passing harsh criticisms on us. But over the years, as you can see in various elections, the votes went to the Democratic camp. So for some members who are wise, like Mr. Wong Kok Kin, they are proposing that we need to work together. I hope he is sincere, and I hope that this will be translated into action, including today. But I don't think this will be easy. Of course, you are going to vote in support of the amendments to the ROP. Dr. Martin Liao, when he explained the amendments proposed by the pro-establishment camp, he sounded convincing. He cited presidents in other countries. He also cited examples in other countries such as Australia, UK, etc. Fortunately, he did not mention the MPC. But I think In a way, the pro-establishment camp is admitting that even in this state, we are more democratic than the mainland. I don't think you would tell people that we should act like the NPC, but we're exactly heading this direction. You talked about democracy in Western countries, but we are not going that direction. You suggest that these amendments are similar to the amendments or rules in other Western countries, but it is very different because they have universal suffrage and they have democracy in the countries. And that's the biggest difference. It's futile, even if you copy the rule book. But unfortunately, we have dictatorship here. The point is, the majority is the pro-establishment camp in this council. But when it comes to elections, we win the majority support. It's on our side. But we only form a minority in this council. Our powers are limited. What is ironic is this, as I mentioned before, we are the pro-establishment camp here in this council because we have the majority vote. And if we have the majority vote in a democratic parliament, we should be able to form a coalition government.
So we'll be in charge of governance, not you. And then we should be the majority, we should be the pro-establishment camp, and you should be the opposition. That's how it should work normally. But who dares to say it's not like that? Of course, you might dare to say that. But anyway, if you compare us with you, well, either you take on other people's system as a whole. Don't just take part of it and then depict yourself in such positive light. A few years ago, some legislative members visited Scandinavia. Many members, especially the loyalist members, would like to ask parliament members, well, do you have filibustering? How do you stop the filibustering? How do you evict members from the chamber? Perhaps they want to learn from others, but they were really let down because they found there's no filibustering in those places. There's no need to stop filibustering. And the people don't speak at length either. Well, but there's something you have learned. Maybe you say we should limit speaking time, and that's what you've learned from them. But then people would have this communication where they would have agreed on things. Both the opposition camp or the ruling party, they would agree first. Now today today you may be the ruling party, tomorrow someone else may be the ruling party, so they don't want to break mess up the rules. But now in your case, you always the one in power, so there is no problem of tipping the balance, so to speak. President, call for quorum, please.
法定人數已夠。
We have a quorum now. The meeting resumes. Mr. Charles Peter MOK. No, I'm just checking the time. Madam Deputy, as I was saying, when we visited overseas parliaments, we found that there they didn't filibustering because they had democracy and sharing of powers. And here we have filibustering, and that's the cause of filibustering. We do not have a democratic political system and a change of ruling parties. We have none in Hong Kong. As a result, we have, although we have more votes, we have fewer seats and even less powers in this council. Of course, in the U.S. and in Europe, there are parliaments that filibustered. For instance, in the U.S., they may have hundreds of more than 100 filibustering there, but as Mr. Wong walked in there, the threshold is very high, and then they could read their telephone directory overnight until the member collapsed. Frankly speaking, because this is not allowed here, if it were, there could be someone reading the ring directory as well. Well, of course, here we do not read telephone directories, and the president will not allow us to do so. And there, do they have somebody to amend the rules of procedure under the excuse that they cannot do anything? And in the U.S., does the ruling party have control over both houses? Of course not. So, and when you copy from them, you should copy in full and not just in part. And a very respectable member, Mr. Abraham Sheikh, is not here. I think he was his words carried wisdom worthy for consideration. He said that he likes to talk about universal values and highly regarded democratic principles. He would say that the pan-democrats have got them all wrong. Well, he is indeed very wise. He is much better than those who like to criticize the pan-democrats just to withdraw those remarks afterwards and to talk about the number of luncheon boxes and so forth. He talked about democracy is protecting the interests of the minority, and was baffled. Who are the minority? Who are the majority in his mind? And he said, you are the minority, and because you are the minority and you are the majority as a result because of this unfair system, and we were supposed to get more votes than you is not the minority here, and this is unique in the world. And I don't quite understand what Mr. Abraham Sheikh mean when he talked about the minority and majority. So using this unjust system to become the minority, these pro-establishment members are in fact the minority when it comes to the number of votes. They say that what they're doing here is to safeguard the interests of the disadvantaged, but it's been more than 20 years. I don't have to go into that in depth. We can see the wider wealth gap here, and also collusion between the business and the government, and who have been protecting such unjust interests. Mr. Abraham Sheikh was very wise. He stood on moral high ground, and I think loyalists should really learn from his style. He keeps saying that he respects the rules of procedure, and he respects this council, and we should not be here and spend time on politics. Well, this may sound pleasing to many in the community and even in the U.S. and Europe. But here, the situation in Hong Kong is because the political system is very unjust. And even members of the public are asking us, how can they respect this council? How can they respect the system? How can they respect the president? President elected in this so unjust way in this council. Has he enforced the rules of procedure fairly so that we feel that the President as well as the Council deserves our respect. They've taken full advantage of the situation. They bulldoze through these amendments because they have enough votes here so as to support the executive. This is so clear. These amendments are either approved or ruled out in the Committee on ROP after 6 hours in chaos, and then they claimed that they had thoroughly discussed these amendments and they returned to the President. In the past, even for a minor normal amendment, it took us months or even longer to agree on them. And Mr. Gary Chen talked about a 6-hour meeting and everything was decided. And the order of discussion in this motion and also amendments that have been accepted and those ruled out by the President, we can see how fair it is. Your behavior will determine whether you deserve people's respect. If the Council is august, of course, you deserve people's respect, but you have flouted all the rules. You set aside legal advice you obtained and asked the pro-establishment camp to get to another 2 sources of legal advice to counter your original legal advice, and then you put all these amendments to this Council. You are not being reasonable and rational. So all you want to do is to get things through as quickly as possible. In fact, the deadline is the 11th of March, but you have set the deadline at Christmas or before Christmas. There's plenty of time for you to speak, but you don't want to defend your right to speak, and there is no need for 5 days. I think things can be done within 3 days. This is indeed a test. Today is amendment to the rules of procedure. Tomorrow is the enactment of legislation under Article 23 of the Basic Law. Mr. Eddie Ju, what's your point of order? I will continue to protest the fact that this Council will soon become the National People's Congress. Speaker's not coming through. Mr. Eddie Ju, please remove your beeping device. Mr. Eddie Ju, I want you once again, if you do not withdraw your beeping device at once, I will direct that you leave the chamber. Mr. Eddie Ju, are you going to Miss Claudia Mo? Miss Claudia Mo, please return to your seat. Dr. Fernando Zhang, please return to your seat. My warning to you. Mr. Xiu Ka-chun, my warning to you. Return to your seats at once. Mr. Eddie Ju, I have warned you twice. If you do not stop your yelling and do not remove your beeping device, I will order that you be removed. Mr. Eddie Ju, I'm of the view that I have given you ample warning. I direct that you leave this chamber. Ms. Claudia Mo, Dr. Fernando Zhang, Mr. Xiu Ka-chun, I just gave you the first warning. Are you willing to return to your seats? Ms. Claudia Mo, Dr. Fernando Zhang, Mr. Xiu Ka-chun, please return to your seats. Return to your seats at once. Will all members return to their seats?
邵家臻議員
Mr. Hon Tanya CHAN,
賴過
Mr. Charles Peter MOK, Mr. Alvin YEUNG, please return to your seats.
我現在宣布暫停。
The meeting is suspended for the security to enforce my order.